Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw, and I'm here with Guy Rubin, who is a familiar face if you've been watching Insider Travel Report. Guy is co-founder and managing partner of Imperial Tours, which is what you would call a destination management company, inbound operator in, of all places, China. So he knows a little bit about what's going on, and it's one of the reasons we wanted to chat with him now to find out about how he's doing, how his company is doing, as well as what's happening in China today, because Guy is very close to all the things going on in that country because that is his specialty. And so you can find out about that and more on Insider Travel Report. Now, Guy, first of all, how are you doing? And how's the family and everything else?
We're all very well. Yeah, it's late here, so the kids are ready for bed. Mum's looking after them, and I'm happy to be talking to you.
Excellent. Well, so I'm sorry to take you away from bedtime stories, but we're going to get our own little story here. Let's talk a little bit about what's happened to your company, Imperial Tours. What have you had to do? I know we had featured you in a column, and you at that time we thought, yeah, maybe 3 months, something like that. Things would emerge by the summer. But what have you had to do to survive and get through this crisis?
Well, I think what makes China interesting a little bit is this isn't the first time for us. So we obviously had SARS in 2003, and I was there for that. And at the beginning, it seemed to be a rerun of SARS 2003. You know, virus is discovered in November, Chinese government drags its feet, and then, you know, SARS, by August, the whole thing had settled down, and we had quite a good fall.
Right.
So at the outset, I thought we were following the same script. However, of course, the key difference was that it escaped China. And so that script all fell down when it broke out, I guess, in Italy and then Spain and then, you know, Europe and America, etc. So that's been a little bit of a different story. So, yeah, it's not going to go to the same script, I don't think. I don't think we're looking at a restart as soon as, you know, certainly not May or June or indeed maybe not September.
Yeah, so you think you're pushing back to maybe the fall if things work out. There's a lot of factors involved, obviously. I think right now the China is not even allowing foreigners to come in anyway because they're fearing reinfections. If I've read my articles correctly, and there's so much to read, believe me.
Yeah, I mean, I think destinations differ. China is a very exotic destination. So if I was sitting in Europe or Hawaii or Canada or a place like that, I might be thinking, yeah, maybe I can get some business from September. But I think realistically for us in China, we're not going to get anything before March 2021. And that's if things go well. I could quite easily see us getting into summer 2021.
So you're a small company. How are you handling that right now? Obviously, you probably have had to furlough people, and you know, you had a small team to begin with. You have a lot of great guides, I know that. But you know, they're just going to have to go into hibernation until that passes, right?
Exactly. I mean, hibernation, mothballing, however you want to phrase it. I think Hong Kong has been very good. Obviously, a lot of people in the travel industry are looking for help from government. And I know that you in the US have had a lot of help, and you will know all about that.
Well, not enough. I just got off a call with Asta, and there's a lot of prospective help, but that money is not getting to the right people so far, at least not to travel advisors and not to travel agencies yet. Sadly, only about 20% of agencies and individual advisors have been able to secure any money. It's very tough. A lot of companies that were probably not qualified for those particular programs did benefit. And, you know, like, what do they say? There's a story like the LA Lakers got money, and why did they need it? You know, I mean, but I don't know if there's programs that are available in China and other places that you could have access to or not.
Well, so that's very much the story for Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is following an approach a little bit like the American approach, a little bit like the UK approach, where it's helping or said to be helping with things like rent and furloughing employees and things like that. But so far we've applied, but we haven't heard anything, so we haven't actually had any of the money. But still, we believe the money will be there, and we believe that we'll qualify. So for a small business, it helps just knowing that there is that backstop, and we trust that backstop will deliver. China's quite different. China has helped in a very different way, which is much more immediate. So, for example, in China, we have big social costs for employees. So apart from, the salary, there's all sorts of benefits in terms of health insurance, workers' benefits, housing fund, maternity leave provision, stuff like that, which comes up to about as much as 45% of the total. And what the government did there was it subsidized all those social insurance costs. And then it also allowed you, if you were a dormant company, to introduce a minimal salary. So that is what we've done with our China office. And then our Hong Kong office, as I say, we're going for our subsidies, and we'll see where we get to. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and I'd be quite happy to share with other people, was I looked at making savings in insurance. There were areas in, I think, liability insurance and also in health insurance, where I found that I was making quite a lot of prepayments. And, did I really need that insurance given that not a huge number of people are coming to China? As you say, the border's shut.
Right.
Why do I need all that insurance? So there are other areas where you're able to, snip a bit and try and preserve your cash, because certainly for us, we have to see this through in hibernation, I think, through to next year.
Yeah, well, hopefully, and it sounds like there are programs available that are going to help you do that. It would be a shame. I've traveled with you and your operation in China. It's an amazing experience, and I'm looking forward to doing it again someday. Let's talk about China opening up. We hear over here that China is emerging from the crisis gradually and getting back to business. What are you seeing and hearing based on your contact with your employees, your guides, and of course the government itself?
I think for a lot of people who are in the US in shelter-in-place programs, or in Spain, or in Italy, or in the UK in lockdown, there's quite a lot of anxiety and quite a lot of frustration. So one of the good things about China is that it was the first to get the disease, and obviously a lot of people died. But in some ways, it's also the first to come out of the disease. And it's doing so in a way that is showing leadership. So we have got social distancing in place. So I think it's quite easy for journalists maybe to overstate the sense of normality in China. It is true that we are coming out of it. People are now emerging from their homes. The bars and restaurants are half full. People are beginning to go on the subway again, which, no one dared to go on the subway. Traffic is starting up again. There's a lot of regional difference in China. You're talking about a place that's the size of Europe. So what's happening in Beijing is different to what's happening in Shanghai, is different to what's happening in Xinjiang. And there's quite a lot of autonomy within those government units into how people are handling this. So my answer isn't true for the whole of China. It's only true from my particular experience of Beijing and then Shanghai.
And certainly Wuhan, we won't even go there, but everybody's doing stories about how Wuhan is already coming back.
Exactly. And I think what's happening is it's quite easy to overstate it. So you've got to bear in mind that lockdown in Wuhan, and it was a much stricter lockdown than anything else I've heard about. I mean, it was a heck of a lot stricter than anything that's happening in Europe or anything else that I've seen. But that's only just finished. Yeah. And when they say that, there's still entry-exit card systems going in and out of residential compounds. And gosh, if anyone comes down with an infection, there's a whole team that comes into place, and you'll be back in quarantine before you can say quarantine. So, people in China are coming out of it. We are coming out of it. Masks are very ubiquitous. Temperature checks are everywhere when you go into a shop, or if so. In Beijing, the gyms are still closed, the cinemas are still closed, the swimming pools are still closed, whereas they're open in Shanghai. In Shanghai, we're reintroducing school, whereas in Beijing, we're still waiting to hear about school.
That's interesting that the regional differences. And are any of the great tourist attractions back open, or are they all still closed? Things like the Great Wall, the Terracotta Warriors, all the things that you have on your your itineraries, or are they still pretty much shut down, even for the Chinese who also like to visit these things?
So, I don't know if it's fair to describe it as such, but there seems to be a medical pole on this issue and an economic pole on this issue. Yeah, and where are you within that spectrum? So in about 1 or 2 days, it's the May holidays in China. And obviously that's a time when usually people spend a lot of money traveling in China. Only today, Beijing announced the end of its quarantine period, for example. So if I now, for the May holidays, want to fly to Shanghai and stay in a hotel and hang out for a few days and then come back, when I come back to Beijing, I will not need to do quarantine. Whereas yesterday, I would have done. So that's not coincidental. People want, the government wants Chinese people to start to spend money and to feel as though they can travel within their country. So you ask about tourist sites. It's a bit spotty. So the Forbidden City is still shut. The Great Wall is open at Badaling and Wuqianyu. We didn't take you there when you came to China. We went to a different part of the Great Wall, which is smaller. So they've opened the two biggest sections. Yeah, and so that, I think, they really, when they did that, had Beijing residents in mind. And I think what will really happen on this May holiday is most people will take holidays close to home. Yeah, there's a really big difference between what's happened in China and what's happened in the West in terms of handling the disease, in the sense that in the West, governments have come out with restrictions and they've been worried that people will not follow the government restriction. Okay, and that, I think, is because societies in developed countries are high trust societies where people generally trust the government and trust the information from the government. China is not a high trust society, it's a low trust society. So people generally don't trust the information coming from the government, the statistics and the general information. So when something like this happens, what happens is Chinese people voluntarily react very cautiously. So it's not really necessary. There was a lockdown in Wuhan, yeah? There wasn't a lockdown in Beijing. But what happened was everyone acted as though there was. Because, Chinese, it's a low trust society. Chinese people are fearful. So what do? They all go home. It's tough to get them out of their house because they're worried. And then they hear that this is what people are doing in Wuhan. You only leave your house one member of family every few days to go and buy vegetables. And so they kind of do the same thing.
So they all parrot what happened in Wuhan. I know I have a friend of mine in Shanghai, and she said, oh, yeah, I'm in my apartment with my husband and my son, and we're under lockdown. And then about a week later, she said, well, I just flew down to Hainan Island because she was running a travel conference and in October, actually, and I did my meetings, and all is good. So
do you know what? Hainan is going to make a killing. Not now, I don't think, because I think Chinese people are still cautious. They're still not that keen to get out of their house. I've got a Chinese friend, who's been in quarantine for 6 weeks. He was in London. He ran from China to London to escape it, caught it in London, went back to China. He's been in quarantine for 6 weeks.
Oh my God.
So I meant to go on holiday with him in June to Spain. He says, no way, he's canceling.
Okay, so that he can't get out of contact. Let's talk a little bit about also, we're hearing a lot, I was on a call with several hoteliers, big chains, who said a lot of their hotels have reopened in China. Is that accurate? I'm talking about even high-end hotels like Four Seasons and things like that, and Marriott's and
Yeah. The hotels that we work with, I'm not even sure that any of them shut down, to tell you the truth, in the big cities. Because again, there was not a lockdown in Beijing. There weren't a lot. There was only a lockdown in one part of China. The rest of China. So hotels that shut down, they tended to do it because there was no business. So, same as the bars and the restaurants. They weren't necessarily told to shut down. It was Chinese New Year. Everyone left. Their workers left. Some of them never came back, and there was no business because everyone was staying at home. So it was more like that. Certainly, we were looking for rooms in the middle of the issue, in the middle of the crisis, and what I found was that different hotels had different rules depending on circumstances. And it wasn't necessarily something that was being decided on a district level. It was actually being decided on a sub-district level. Like, for example, which foreigners could stay in which hotels under which circumstances.
No, that's interesting because I guess we didn't have that impression because of what we've had to deal with here. Where literally there are hotels that are open, absolutely, but a lot of them have closed, especially the higher end ones, which is interesting. That the more luxurious hotels seem to have shut down. The mid-market hotels are still open to an extent, but the low occupancies are incredibly low. So it's a different kind of experience. Let's talk a little bit about, is there any sense of when China might even allow foreign visitors in, and under what conditions is that being discussed? Is there any?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I don't know if you've been exposed to it, but there's a lot of authoritarian governments around the world who are quite pleased with how they've handled this crisis. So governments like the Singaporean government kind of believe that authoritarian governments are better suited to dealing with pandemic than democratic governments. And one of the weaknesses, I think, in that argument is when there's a trade-off. So, for example, we in the West might decide, okay, if COVID has a mortality rate of 0.2% or 0.1%, are we prepared to take a trade-off and accept that cost in order to open up our economies? And I think that's a debate and a discussion that a democracy can have that an authoritarian government cannot have. Yeah, and so in a way that is a strength. So my view on what China's going to do is that I think it might follow the West a little bit. So although it was first into it and it's first out of it, it's not able to deal with the concept of a trade-off. If the West accepts that trade-off, the West seems to be going to a situation now, we're talking at the end of April, where people are starting to think about that issue. Yeah. If the West goes into a trade-off, well, then that's a point where maybe Eastern authoritarian governments will think, well, hey, is that something we should consider? Otherwise, my sense is China is going to be incredibly cautious. Right. Yeah. We've got a big meeting coming up, May the 19th to May the 22nd, the National People's Congress, which should have been in March but was delayed to May. I think a lot of things are being delayed until after that conference. As you yourself mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, foreigners are not even allowed into China at the moment. If you are married to a Chinese lady and you wanted to come back to China, you wouldn't be allowed in. If you have a work permit, you're not allowed in even. So even under these situations, foreigners are not being allowed in. So there are school teachers, the schools are set to reopen. They're international schools. And those teachers are not being allowed in to work at the schools. And that's a huge problem. So I believe that after the conference, which will happen May 19th to May the 22nd, there will be gradual reopening. So foreigners, foreign experts, foreign specialists will start to be allowed back into China so that they can resume their work. But for the Chinese government, the inbound leisure travel market is very low on their list of priorities.
I can imagine, yes. Well, we'll see what happens. I know, ironically, I think you actually can come into the U.S., although you may be quarantined or at least asked to self-quarantine, regardless. We'll see what happens there. Let's talk a little bit about what you're hearing about. What has China learned from this COVID-19 crisis that helped it emerge from the crisis? And the corollary is, what lessons can other countries take from China's experience?
What have they learned? I think one thing that don't forget, they already had SARS. So they did have a huge head start on Western developed countries because of that. So they were able to show quite a high degree of leadership, I think. And the first thing that they did, they did some absolutely incredible things. It's reported widely in the West that, they built 2 hospitals in a matter of, weeks. And those hospitals were created actually to take moderately affected people, not seriously affected people. So it left the hospitals that were in place to take the seriously affected people. So it was an incredibly smart decision. And actually, Western countries with 2-month lead missed that, And that, I think that's a mistake that the UK has made, for example, not doing that. The UK went and built a huge hospital for seriously ill people, which isn't being used. Yeah. So,
well, we had that same situation where we had a Navy ship brought into New York that was supposed to be for non-COVID-19 patients. And about a week into it, they realized they'd had only about 2 customers.
Yeah, exactly.
They changed it to accepting COVID. And then I just heard that the ship will leave. I think it may have already left. So we'll see what happens. I don't understand that. But it's been kind of crazy, the information you get. But you're right. I did hear that story about what China had done with the hospitals.
So that's one thing. The second thing that they did for themselves and for the world was that they proved lockdown works. And that was a huge directional pointer. And it was just an incredible thing. At the time, I remember watching interviews of doctors saying no one has ever attempted this. To lock down an entire city was just kind of revolutionary. I think the other thing that they learned was the weakness in their own pandemic system, their pandemic reporting system. So we know that from December the 15th until December the 30th, there was not sufficient reporting on this matter. And they learned that the system didn't have enough political power to overcome resistance within the Wuhan provincial government. Mm-hmm. So that's a big learning point for them. For overseas governments, what they learn is they need a pandemic system. Yeah. So I think that in the US, you had one and then you stopped funding it. I don't even know if the UK has one, but I certainly know that Italy, an Italian doctor thought that they had very similar things going on in Italy in November, and no one reported it. So China did have a system. It was aware, it was watchful, but once it picked it up, it wasn't able to act quickly enough. I think China's learned that wet markets need to be regulated, that they're a danger area. And then the other thing that I think that it's learned it has to look at, but with which it has an enormously difficult relationship, is how traditional Chinese medicine fits into this whole picture. Because I think, the new malaria cure comes from a 4th century treatise on wormwood. So there is knowledge within the body of traditional Chinese medicine. There are things to learn from it. So it's not something that should be thrown out. There is knowledge within it. However, the animals are mistreated as a result of it. And then what happens is the Chinese government, thinking that they're doing the right thing, legislates against illegal trade in animals for TCM purposes. But all that does is it forces it underground. And once you've forced it underground, who knows what's happening to those animals? So, So how do you deal with that? Do you deal it at the consumer level and consumer awareness and trying to stop the demand for it in the same way that in the US you want to stop the demand for drugs? In China, should you stop the demand for TCM by increasing awareness of what this does and the risks it creates? So I think that's a whole conversation that China has to have with itself. After this is all over. Obviously, at the moment, everyone's saying they're going to take lots of action. Whether people actually do take action is something that I think we're all always a little bit cynical about. But this has obviously caused a great deal of disruption in the world. So I believe they will take action.
Well, we can only hope that they will follow up after this. Let's just end this by talking about how you think this crisis has affected first travel and tourism going forward to China, and then you can expand to the rest of the world. I mean, this obviously is a game changer, I would think.
So so in terms of China, inbound to China, I think, China's obviously, a momentous civilization, one of the most important sources of culture in the world with a huge amount to offer the world. So it's always going to be an attractive destination for people to travel to. However, at this particular moment in time, I don't really see it as being, I think it needs time to get over this. First of all, people see it as the source of the disease at the moment. That might change, but that's certainly the situation at the moment. And so people are going to be reluctant to travel to a country that's the source of a disease. Secondly, there's a huge amount of anger. And we're seeing that expressed, of course, with rising anti-Asian American sentiment. But there's a huge amount of anger towards China across the globe for this disease because it's seen as the cause of it. Third thing is it's an election year in the US. And it seems that anti-China sentiment is basically a campaign platform for various people, like who can be more anti-China. So that's not going to be good for business. And then lastly, China's going through a bit of a bad patch with its human rights, situation where a lot of people over the world are worried about what's happening with the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong and things like that. And that sits like just underneath the surface.
No, absolutely.
So I think all of these are going to be a break on business to China, but ultimately China is a massive destination. And so in the long term, it'll break through it. So that's looking at inbound. Looking at outbound, I'd like to ask you a question and say, why do you see it as a game changer?
Well, I mean, initially the travelers from China were ramping up. They were going all over the world. Clearly, we see them in New York. We see them all around. We see them in Venice. They were definitely, starting to travel the world, both in groups and individually. And clearly now, because of what has happened, that market is gone, at least temporarily. Obviously, the major cruise lines thought the Chinese were going to be a huge market for them. And at this point, it's not going to happen, at least probably not until next year, at least. But, apparently Chinese like to cruise, and they saw this incredible market and they went after it. And now, they're going to have to wait a bit. So I guess from that perspective, we've sort of lost the outbound China market for now. How quickly that rebounds is anyone's guess. I would guess probably not till next year at the earliest.
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo your thoughts. So I think you're completely spot on. I think we're on, the general trend is not going to shift. Chinese people are incredibly curious. They're very intelligent. They want to see the world. So that's not going anywhere. However, they're scared, and they're very prone to being scared. Just generally as a civilization. They just do have a great concern for security and safety. So if there is a question of safety, they're going to be very reluctant to put themselves at risk.
Well, especially now that the hotbeds of the crisis are quite literally here in the States. In New York, I mean, we now we're nearing 56,000 deaths. Infections are off the charts. I would love, as we just have discussed earlier, if they would also report recoveries out of all infections. Yeah, which is, I think, a real failing of the consumer media not to report the number of people who have recovered. And we all know many people have recovered. We do know some who have succumbed, usually with some underlying conditions or something. So it is. Consumer media right now. I mean, I've long since given up watching CNN every day or Fox or anything else, because it's just constant barrage here, where there is no other news. And
so I think you pick up on a major point there. What are we going to do about the media? Because I do think that the media has gotten a little bit out of control? And do we need to take the reins of the horse and steer it in a particular direction? But on the other hand, it's a really hard issue because I'm also completely against censorship and things like that. So it's a really tough issue. But I think the one thing we in the West have to think about is, what do we want the role of media to be in our society? Because it clearly has gotten out of control. And you just picked up on an excellent point. They never report on recoveries. They always give totals. They always give total amounts without regard to how many have recovered. So it's not a net figure. To increase the sense of panic, to increase the hysteria. They have
increase, they think, their ratings. But I got to tell you, I'm increasingly turning it off because it is just constant barrage. I understand what you're saying. It's hard for governments or to impose restrictions on media in a free society. But on the other hand, there has to be some leadership among the media to come out and say, look, this is not how we should be doing this. And
it may be a broader issue about integrity. Integrity in public office, integrity in the media. I think there's a lot there. But in terms of going back to outbound travel, another point I would say is this. A lot of destinations talk about having a destination strategy. Very few actually do. And I'm sure that you will know more about this than anyone. Consultants get paid all the time for destination strategies, and the governments never actually implement the thing. So I think destinations could see this as a breather, in terms of what's happening with outbound China travel. So they've got about a year to think about things, and they've got a year to think. Do I want all these people in my destination? If I don't want them, am I going to come up with an administrative rule, or am I going to increase my prices, or am I going to be part of a region with a regional strategy that diverts certain people to certain places? I would say this is a breather, because otherwise, you named it, destinations like Venice, they're just not going to be able to cope with the current trends as they play out. That there's got to be a change.
No, absolutely. And in fact, it's rather ironic that, just 4 or 5 months ago, we were talking about the problems of over-tourism, and now we're here. And if you visit some of these destinations now, it's probably the best time ever to go because they have been overcrowded. We've all been to Venice and love it, but they have serious issues. And our colleague, Andrea Grisdale, who IC Bellagio, was actually at the forefront of talking about that situation in Italy. And we just have to be very careful as we emerge from this crisis that we're not going to go in the other direction. Let me close this up. Is there any other observations you want to make about China today and about this coronavirus crisis?
I think for me, I would just say that I'm disappointed by the blame game. I think, I think it's ridiculous that China is trying to blame the US for things. And I think it's as ridiculous that the US is trying to blame China for things. I think it's good for people to bear in mind that no one in China wanted this disease. Everyone has suffered from it. The Chinese people were the first to die from it. They've paid a huge economic cost from it themselves. And rather than blaming each other, what would be so much better is to join, to unite, to communicate, to use each other's resources as a common species to deal with this thing. So I would just hope that we can remember that we're all fellows on the same planet. And also a sub-part to this clause is, the rising anti-Asian sentiment within, say, the US or across Europe at the moment. I really would hope that would stop. Certainly those people have got absolutely nothing to do with it.
No, well said. And I think China and the U.S. and China and Europe are become so interdependent on the economic front that you would hope that they can come to some agreements and and again, not blame each other and come up with solutions and collective solutions to this whole thing, because clearly, especially in travel and tourism, we clearly have markets that can benefit from both sides. The outbound market, for the inbound market, it's just, we have to stop this whole thing in the bud and say, look, we're all in this together. We'll find some solutions. I mean, for me, I just want a mask, and I think most of them are made in China, so I can't find a mask. I go to Walmart, I go to the CVS, I go everywhere. Do you have a mask? No. And then I ask if they have toilet paper, and they don't have that. So this is a problem. I finally found a big pack of toilet paper, but I still don't have a mask. So I have to worry about that. But anyway, listen, Guy, it's been great to see you in a very different circumstances than we're usually used to seeing you. We'll check back with you in a few weeks to see how things are going. We can maybe talk some more about this. I think we've raised some very interesting issues during this discussion, and hopefully our viewers, we have about 100,000 U.S. travel advisors and travel professionals out there watching us. They will learn a little bit, and maybe we've learned a little bit here. Again, thanks very much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, James. And yeah, I think certainly all of us in the travel industry definitely take a leadership role in bringing countries together.
Absolutely. I'm James Shillinglaw, and this is Insider Travel Report.